You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 30th of April. Convert to Islam killed in Pakistan. Flood alerts for low-lying areas along with hosepipe ban. Spanish village reverts back to the peseta. Germany angry at Ukraine over Tymoshenko jail sentence. More attacks on African Christians by Muslim Africans. Thought for the day, listen and be damned. UK news. An aid worker from Britain who was kidnapped in Pakistan has been found dead. Khalil Dale, who converted to Islam and spent his life helping people, was found decapitated and mutilated by a roadside in Quetta. Apparently it bore all the marks of a Taliban killing. It has been more than 4 months since Dale was captured, and the note on his body intimated that he had been killed because his ransom was not paid. On the other side, surprisingly, is the deal offered by Al-Qaeda for the hate preacher Abu Qatada. This foul organisation has mooted a deal that the preacher to be deported to the country of his choice. If the British government comply with their terrorist demands, they will exchange Qatada for a kidnapped British worker in South Africa. We should do what these people would understand. Behead Qatada in reprisal for Khalil Dale's execution. There, simples. The West Country is amongst the many flood alert warnings in the UK for the coming week. It does of course apply to people living in low-lying areas and floodplains. Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, which was devastated by flooding in July 2007, was on alert with the Environment Agency, setting up an incident room there along with 2 others in the Midlands and another in the Wessex area. The Environment Agency had a total of 32 flood warnings and 160 flood alerts in place on its website today. These flood alerts sit unhappily next to the hosepipe bans in force in some of these areas. Euro news. The Eurocrats are all in a spin at the start of this week. The downgrading of Spain has not only embarrassed the country but destabled the euro yet again. The downgrade was set by a German agenda. Elections are soon to get started in France and Greece with an uncertain outcome. On a more positive note, a Spanish town, Villanueva de Santiago, is looking to the past to safeguard the future of its ailing economy by reintroducing the peseta. Luis Miguel Campello, chairman of the local Merchants Association and fed up with the failing euro, has stated, "People kept hold of old pesetas, thinking that they might come in handy one day if the euro fails. It seems that those fears might come true. Lots of Spaniards, especially older people, have a strong emotional attachment to the peseta and still do their sums in it when talking about big transactions. The economy is struggling so much that euros are scarce. We thought that if people had to hunt around for their old pesetas, then why shouldn't we accept them as legal currency?" The German Chancellor Angela Merkel is demonstrating her anger towards the Ukraine over the imprisoned former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. Tymoshenko was jailed for 7 years, apparently due to allegations of impropriety over a gas deal with Russia in 2009. Merkel stated that if Tymoshenko remains in prison, she could cancel her visit to the Ukraine during the Euro 2012 football tournament in June. Der Spiegel reported yesterday. If Tymoshenko is not released by the start of the Euro in June, the German footballers will then most likely have to play without Merkel being in attendance, the magazine said, without naming any sources. World news. Another attack on Christians by Muslims in Nigeria leaves at least 20 people dead. The town of Kano was the scene of a bloodbath, as it has been described by the surviving Christians who fled the Muslim gunmen who burst into a lecture theatre used by Christians. At least 20 were gunned down, 2 of which are reputed to be the lecturers. In yet another religious hate crime, 1 person died and 15 people were wounded when a grenade was thrown into a church in Kenya's capital during Sunday service. Nairobi's Deputy Police Chief Moses Mbati said the grenade exploded at God's House of Miracles International Church in Nairobi. In February, police spokesman Eric Karaith said the killings, which go back to October, are believed to have been carried out by sympathisers of Al-Shabaab in Kenya. One World at 8 writer commented, "Where is hope not hate when Christians are being killed around the world?" Thought for the day, listen and be damned. Thank God we are publishing and distributing thousands of leaflets for the GLA and mayoral elections in London, because otherwise a huge majority of British Londoners would not know we're even in the running. Everywhere I read in the national rags and news there is not a mention of the party who must not be named. Various and plentiful are the prose on Boris and Ken, pontificating of which or wherever, but nothing about anyone else in the running, let alone us, the British National Party. No worries though, our stalwarts are doing a great job, so the man in the street is given a true choice for his city, and let us hope great British bums get off British seats, or rather Chinese sofas, and actually go to the polls this time. Because my friends, it is now or never. The thin red line is getting mighty thin, and we want you to avoid what the next few years could bring to our capital city. We already have the bloody Olympics, which I hope sincerely never gets off the ground. I literally cried all those years ago when we succeeded in getting these games, or rather the World Committee thought, hey ho, that's one way to keep the Brits poor and occupied for the next few years, also a sneaky way to bring even more immigrants over to stay. Now even a large block of flats is going to be hosting high velocity surface to air missiles in case Al-Qaeda decides to land a plane in the centre of the games village. What effect that will have I cannot imagine, other than to scare 7 streets of bleep out of the residents. I would have thought a very large picture of George Clooney, naked, waving in the breeze, would have certainly put off any bomber, but then I could be very wrong. That would certainly be the only thing that would bring me out from under my very large stone this summer. George, that is, not the bomber. You all know my opinion of the Olympics, so I will not dwell on that unpleasantness. Suffice to say, I watched a programme called The Big Question on Sunday. I was informed of it by a listener because it was hosting the question, should we label halal and kosher meats in the supermarkets? I turned on expecting to see a group of intellectuals actually debating this contentious issue, and what did I see? It is hosted by a Nicky Campbell, who seems to be in continuous competition with the people from whom he wants answers for a start. No sooner does some poor devil start to speak and good old Nicky butts in and completely changes direction. Not a good start, one would think, and one would be right. I sat through various political correct student and social worker ridden opinions, waiting for the halal question, which of course was last. I did notice that although there were several Asian faces in the audience, the actual people who were brought in for their religious agenda did not contain a genuine Muslim. There was a rabbi, a couple of rather wet and earnest Church of England or Anglican guys, and to represent the Muslim ideology was a white convert from the British Muslim Council of England. Well, as you can guess, that question deviated from the actual path of labelling the meat in supermarkets, etc., to whether it should be allowed to religious intolerance, at which stage the EDL and the far right was mentioned, but not the party who shall be named, rather like She by H. Rider Haggard. I was so glad I wasn't there because I would have been arrested and clapped in jail for very, very bad behaviour. The convert, who we all know are more fanatical than their original counterparts, gave voice to the fact that he knew that unbelievably, and to surmise, a sheep does not feel as much pain being hung up and allowed to bleed out for 10 minutes or longer, with all his pals around him doing the same, than a stunned sheep. If you believe that one, matey, we can always try it out on you. He pointed out the ratio of animals who escape stunning, about 30,000, and who would be better off being killed in the halal fashion. At no time did anyone state that one country should not adopt another culture's way of doing things unwillingly, and we are unwilling to accept this sort of methodology in the UK, although we seem to have to eat the meat. Now, the Muslim Council of Great Britain actually endorsed the labelling of halal meats, not for us, but for their own people to pick out what is correct for them. Fine. So why are we being forced to buy halal meat through not only our ignorance but the greed of the supermarket chains? There was the usual shaking of heads and renting of garments when the far right was mentioned, as always, which made the grotty audience feel good for around 10 minutes. But really, a proper open discussion? No. You simply cannot have that in this country anymore. The media is so biased it fits into the communist-like propaganda of 30 years ago. The whole point of the insidious encroachment of a different culture and religion on our culture and religion is completely ignored. The fact that wherever you get a large and ever-growing Muslim population you get bleed over, that is literal and figurative. They want us to adopt, however silently, their religion, their culture and their food. If we didn't have the huge parasitic Muslim mass in our country, there would be no halal foods. We would not need them. Kosher food has been around many, many years without being peddled to Christians or non-Jews on a national level. One thing that did come to light and was swept away very quickly was the fact that all this halal food which we, the government, the NHS, the schools and the armed forces are funding goes to pay for what? More mosques, more madrasas and, more spookily, joins with the drugs money in funding Islamic terrorists both here and abroad. Why do you think Muslims spend very little money in or on the UK? They only deal in cash and with other Muslims, and their money goes where they want it, not the British government. Just a thought when you're buying a cheap bit of chicken or a ready meal or a burger. Most New Zealand lamb is halal. Buy British pork, at least you know it isn't halal or kosher. We must start thinking in this country of where and how we spend our money and stop giving it away to fund dubious organisations. This applies to most of the fast food franchised out businesses as well as supermarkets. Think before you buy. You could be funding another soldier's death or worse. Roll on the Olympics and Al-Qaeda. Perhaps they can be useful in the end. And finally, protection laws in Australia have come into action this week to protect koala bears living in their most vulnerable habitats. The furry icon of Australia has had its population fall drastically over the past few decades in certain areas due to dogs, traffic and the expansion of towns and cities. The new protection laws will see that their numbers rise again and plantations of eucalyptus for them all to enjoy. Koalas rule, okay. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. And mutilated by a roadside in Quetta. Apparently it bore all the marks of a Taliban killing. It has been more than 4 months since Dale was captured, and the note on his body intimated that he had been killed because his ransom was not paid. On the other side, surprisingly, is the deal offered by Al-Qaeda for the hate preacher Abu Qatada. This foul organisation has mooted a deal that the preacher to be deported to the country of his choice. If the British government comply with their terrorist flood alerts for low-lying areas along with hosepipe ban. Spanish village reverts back to the peseta. Germany angry at Ukraine over Tymoshenko jail sentence. More attacks on African Christians by Muslim Africans. Thought for the day. Listen and be damned. UK news. An aid worker from Britain who was kidnapped in Pakistan has been found dead. Khalil Dale, who converted to Islam and spent his life helping people, was found decapitating up an incident room there along with 2 others in the Midlands and another in the Wessex area. The Environment Agency had a total of 32 flood warnings and 160 flood alerts in place on its website today. These flood alerts sit unhappily next to the hosepipe bans in force in some of these areas. Euro news. The Eurocrats are all in a spin at the start of this week. The downgrading of Spain has not only embarrassed the country but destabled the Euro's demands they would exchange Qatada for a kidnapped British worker in South Africa. We should do what these people would understand. Behead Qatada in reprisal for Khalil Dale's execution. There, simples. The West Country is amongst the many flood alert warnings in the UK for the coming week. It does of course apply to people living in low-lying areas and floodplains. Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, which was devastated by flooding in July 2007, was on alert with the Environment Agency.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday, the 30th of April. Convert to Islam killed in Pakistan.